Wind mourned through Montana pines, carving secrets into the frost. Snow shrouded the peaks like forgotten ghosts. She was too frail. He laughed, too soft for this land of ice and iron, just a whisper against the storm. But the wilderness demanded more than muscle. It demanded grit carved in silence, resolve forged in cold. And when the shadows closed in, when laughter choked on fear, she reached for the rifle. Its voice would speak her truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. Frostfall wasn't dying. It was a corpse slowly being buried. Snow drifts piled against the sagging false fronts of what had once been a bustling silver camp. Now, only a handful of structures clung to the frozen mud street. A general store with boarded windows, a livery stable exhaling the faint, sour breath of neglected horses, and the Lucky Strike Saloon, its sign creaking a mournful protest in the relentless wind. Lantern light bled weakly from the saloon's grimy windows, pooling on the trampled snow like spilled, tarnished gold. The air smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, and the deep, pervasive cold that seeped into the bones. Lila Crane moved through this desolation like a shadow given form. She was slight, almost swallowed by a man's oversized buffalo coat. The collar turned high against the biting wind that scoured her cheeks raw. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, crunched rhythmically on the packed ice, the only sound besides a wind sigh and the distant, lonely cry of a raven. Exhaustion etched fine lines around her eyes, dark smudges beneath them speaking of miles walked in sleep stolen in hollows beneath rock ledges. Yet, within her gaze, gray as the winter sky above the peaks, burned a quiet, unyielding light. It was the look of someone who had already walked through fire and found the cold a lesser hardship. Her left hand, gloved in threadbare leather, instinctively brushed the front of her coat, feeling the small, hard outline beneath the layers. A tarnished brass locket, its clasp long broken, a cold weight against her chest. It held no picture now, only the faint scent of lavender and charwood, a memory encapsulated. A faint, silvery scar, like a frozen tear, marked the delicate skin just above her right wrist, visible for a fleeting second as her glove slipped. She tucked her hand back quickly, burying the reminder. The saloon door swung open, spilling out a gust of raucous laughter, the sour tang of cheap whiskey, and the sudden, jarring warmth of bodies packed too close. A man stumbled out, blinking against the gray light, and nearly collided with her. He was thick-set, bearded, his eyes bleary. He looked her up and down, a leer twisting his chapped lips. "Lost, little dove?" he slurred, his breath frosting the air between them. "Ain't no place here for tender things, especially not alone." Lila didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her own expression flat, unreadable as river ice. "Looking for Holt," she stated, her voice low but clear, cutting through the wind. "Tanner Holt." The man snorted, amusement warring with drunken confusion. "Holt? That sour old badger? What business you got with him? He ain't much for company sides his own misery, and that cabin of his ain't fit for—" He trailed off, his leer returning as his eyes wandered again. "Reckon I could show you warmer lodgings." Before Lila could respond, a new voice cut in, sharp as a flint strike. "Leave it, Briggs. She ain't your concern." Another man stood framed in the saloon doorway, taller, leaner than the drunk, wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat worn smooth at the elbows. Tanner Holt. His face was all angles and weathered lines, framed by a dark, unkempt beard streaked with gray. A battered Stetson shadowed eyes the color of old whiskey, hard and assessing. He leaned slightly on his right leg, a subtle stiffness betraying the old injury beneath the layers. His gaze swept over Lila, lingering not on her face, but on the worn thinness of her coat, the fragility her posture couldn't entirely hide beneath its resolve. A dismissive snort escaped him. "Found him," he said, his voice a dry rasp like boots on gravel. He stepped fully onto the boardwalk, ignoring the drunk who shuffled away muttering. "What you want?" Town's dead. Silver's gone. Only thing left is the cold and fools too stubborn to leave. His eyes flicked past her, scanning the empty street and the looming pines beyond with the ingrained wariness of a man used to threats. Shelter, Lila said simply. For the night. Heard you had a place. Can pay. She held out a single silver dollar, glinting dully in the weak light. Tanner didn't take it. He let out a low, humorless chuckle that condensed into a cloud before his face. Shelter? Girl, look around you. This ain't a Sunday picnic ground. That cabin's barely holding the wolves out, let alone a blizzard. And you, he shook his head, a gesture heavy with weary cynicism. You look like a stiff wind that'd snap you clean in two. Ain't no place out here for the frail. You won't last a week. His hand unconsciously brushed a heavy belt buckle at his waist, a scarred piece of tarnished silver, etched with a crude half-moon design. The gesture seemed habitual, a touchstone for something buried deep. Lila's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The word frail hung in the frigid air between them, sharp as an icicle. She didn't lower the coin. I've lasted this far. One night, that's all I asked. Her gaze didn't waver from his. Tanner studied her, those whiskey-colored eyes narrowing. He saw the exhaustion, yes, the worn clothes, the slightness of her frame. But he also saw the stillness in her, the watchfulness in those gray eyes that missed nothing, the drunk slinking away, the creak of the sign, the way the ravens wheeled over the ridge. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. He grunted, a non-committal sound. Coin won't buy you warmth if the fire goes out, or stop a hungry grizzly. Or worse. He paused, his gaze drifting past her again, towards the dark mouth of the trail leading out of town. Fine. One night. Cabins half a mile up the north ridge. Follow the creek ice till you see the smoke, if it's lit. Don't dawdle. Light's fading. He turned abruptly, the stiffness in his leg more pronounced, and disappeared back into the saloon's smoky embrace without another word, leaving Lila standing alone in the cold street, the silver dollar still held out in her gloved hand. She slowly closed her fingers over the coin, the cold metal biting even through the leather. Frail, the word echoed, not with hurt, but with a cold, familiar anger. She tucked the coin away and turned her back on the feeble glow of the lucky strike, facing the path Tanner had indicated. A narrow track winding into the skeletal embrace of snow-laden pines. The wind snatched at her coat, whispering secrets she didn't want to hear. As she passed the livery stable, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A boy, maybe 16, huddled in the deep shadows beside a stack of frozen firewood. He was thin, all sharp angles and watchful eyes beneath a ragged fur cap. A worn rabbit-skin coat hung loose on his frame. He watched her pass, his expression unreadable, not hostile, but deeply cautious, like a wild creature assessing a potential threat. His hand rested near the worn handle of a small knife tucked into his belt, its handle pale bone, carved with faint, unreadable markings. Nate, just another ghost in Frostfall's graveyard. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, her weary resolve his guarded survival, before he melted further back into the shadows, vanishing as silently as he'd appeared. Lila pushed on, leaving the pathetic cluster of buildings behind. The path climbed steeply, the snow deeper here, untrammeled except for faint tracks of small animals. The pines closed in, their branches heavy with snow, groaning under the weight. The air grew colder, sharper, each breath a knife in the lungs. The only sound was the crunch of her boots, the sigh of the wind in the high branches, and the distant, muffled rush of the frozen creek somewhere to her left. She walked what felt like an hour, the gray twilight deepening towards true dusk. The cold seeped through her layers, a persistent ache. Just as she began to wonder if she'd missed a turn, a thin, gray tendril of smoke became visible against the darkening sky, winding its way from behind a rocky outcrop ahead. Relief, cold and sharp, pricked at her. The cabin, round in the outcrop. She saw it, a small, squat log structure hunched against the hillside, backed by a sheer rock face. Smoke curled from a rough stone chimney. One small window, glazed with thick bubbled glass, glowed faintly orange within. A lean-to sheltered a single sturdy-looking bay horse. Tanner's place. It looked as unwelcoming as the man, but it promised walls and a fire. She was 10 yards from the door, her body screaming for warmth, when she stopped dead. Her eyes, trained by necessity to see what others missed, scanned the trampled snow around the cabin's entrance. Tanner's boot prints were clear, leading inside, but alongside them, partially obscured by the fresh fall but unmistakable, were other tracks, larger, deeper, made by boots with a distinct, sharp heel pattern. And beside one print, pressed into the crust of snow near the woodpile, was a single, perfect impression, not an animal track, the unmistakable, intricate scrollwork of a spur rowel. Lila's breath hitched, frosting instantly in the air. Not just any spur. She'd seen that pattern before, etched in moonlight and terror. Silver, sharp, deadly, Cade Waller's trademark. Her hand flew instinctively to her chest, clutching the hidden locket beneath her coat. The cold fear that had been a constant companion surged, icy and paralyzing. He was here. He'd found Tanner. Or was he waiting for her? Inside the cabin, all was silent. No movement. No sound from the horse. Only the thin, accusing line of smoke curling into the twilight. The rifle Tanner had mocked her for not being strong enough to handle. She knew it leaned just inside his door, where he always kept it, unattended. Her gaze locked on the cabin door, then darted to the surrounding trees, dense and full of shifting shadows. The wind chose that moment to drop, leaving an unnatural, crushing silence. Every nerve screamed. He was here, and the rifle was right there. Could she reach it before the shadows reached for her? The silence was absolute. It pressed against Lila's eardrums like the weight of the snow-laden pines outside Tanner Holt's cabin. Her gaze remained locked on a single, intricate spur imprint pressed into the crusted snow near the woodpile. Cade Waller. The name echoed in her mind, colder than the Montana dusk. The intricate scrollwork wasn't just a pattern. It was a signature, a promise carved in ice. He hadn't bothered to hide it. It was a taunt, as sharp and deliberate as the silver rowel itself. Her hand, still clutching the worn wool over the hidden locket, felt numb. Not from cold, but from a memory it ripped open. The scent of lavender choked by smoke, the searing heat on her wrist. Instinct screamed. Survival overrode caution. She lunged to the cabin door, her worn boots silent on the packed earth floor. Tanner's rifle, a long-barreled Sharps leaning against the rough-hewn logs beside the entrance, felt heavier than she expected, the cold metal biting through her thin gloves. Yet, the weight was grounding. She fumbled for the lever action, the unfamiliar mechanics clumsy in her frozen fingers, but she managed to cock it, the metallic snick unnervingly loud in the stillness. The sound of the bolt echoed the frantic thudding of her heart against her ribs. What in blazes? Tanner's voice, thick with sleep and surprise, cracked the silence like a whip. He surged up from a battered armchair near the stone hearth, where the low fire cast long, dancing shadows. His hand instinctively went to the holstered Colt at his hip, his eyes wide and instantly alert, sweeping from Lila to the rifle in her grasp. The flickering firelight caught the scar half-moon on his belt buckle, turning it into a dull, accusing eye. "Put that down, you fool woman. Ain't no one." "Spurs," Lila interrupted, her voice low and taut as a bowstring. She didn't lower the rifle, keeping its muzzle pointed safely toward the dirt floor, but angled towards the door. Her eyes never left the heavy timber barrier. Outside, by the woodpile, silver rowel, scrollwork like a spider's web. Cade Waller's. She saw the recognition flicker in Tanner's whiskey-dark eyes, followed by a hardening that etched new lines on his weathered face. He moved with surprising speed despite the old limp, crossing the small cabin in 3 strides. He didn't reach for the rifle she held. Instead, He peered through a narrow gap in the shuttered window, his breath fogging the thick bubble glass. "Don't see nothing," he muttered, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "but tracks fresh enough." He glanced back at her, his gaze sharp, assessing her grip on the heavy sharps. There was no mockery now, only a grim calculation. "You know how to use that thing, or you just fancy holding it?" Before Lila could answer, a soft, hesitant knock sounded on the door. 3 quick raps, like a woodpecker in the snow. Tanner's hand tightened on his Colt. Lila shifted the rifle's weight, her finger hovering near the trigger guard. "Hope? It's Nate." The voice was young, tight with fear, muffled by the thick wood. "Saw you come up. Need to talk. Quick like." Tanner exchanged a look with Lila, a flicker of wary understanding passing between them. He eased the heavy wooden bar back and cracked the door open just wide enough. Nate stood hunched against the biting wind, his ragged rabbit-skin coat pulled tight, the fur cap pulled low over his ears. His sharp eyes darted past Tanner, taking in Lila holding the rifle, the tension in the room. He held up a hand, palm out. "Ain't here for trouble. Saw him. Down by the creek ice earlier." "Who?" Tanner demanded, pulling the boy inside and swiftly rebarring the door. The warmth of the cabin seemed to intensify the smell of wood smoke, wet wool, and fear. "Lean fella," Nate whispered, his voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. He shifted nervously, his hand brushing the bone handle of the knife at his belt, a small, worn thing that seemed both a tool and a talisman. Moved like a shadow. Horse was big, black as pitch. Saw the spurs catch the light when he dismounted. Silver. Jingle like death bells. He looked directly at Lila, his young face pale beneath the grime. Heard him a skin down at the livery, about a woman. Said she had hair like winter wheat. Might have a mark. He gestured vaguely towards his own wrist. Said she was worth a heap of greenbacks. Dead or alive? Dead or alive? The word slammed into Lila. The cabin walls seemed to close in. The heat from the hearth suddenly felt oppressive, smothering. Her thumb found the broken clasp of the locket beneath her coat, the cold brass a familiar anchor. The scent trapped within it, lavender and ash, seemed to coil up from memory, thick and choking. The scent had been sweet first, lavender from the bush by the porch, carried on a warm Nebraska evening breeze. Then came the acrid sting of kerosene. Shouts, distorted by fear and crackling fury. Pa's voice raw. Lila run, take your ma's, a hand, rough and smelling of cheap tobacco, grabbing her arm. Cade Waller's face, sharp and pitiless in the flickering orange light, his silver spur gleaming on his boot as he kicked over the lamp. The searing pain on her wrist as she wrenched free, the locket chain snapping. The roar of the fire consuming the dry timber walls, the scream swallowed by the inferno, the weight of the locket clutched in her uninjured hand, the tiny painted portrait inside already curling from heat, running, stumbling, the smell of burning wood, and something else, something sweet and terrible, clinging to her hair, her skin, her soul. Running into the cold prairie swallowed the light and the sound, leaving only the echo of Cade's laughter and the promise in his eyes. "You're marked, girl, marked in mine." Lila blinked, the gritty cabin snapping back into focus. Tanner was watching her, a strange intensity in his gaze. He'd seen the distant horror in her eyes, the tremor she fought to control. Nate shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift in the air. "Waller," Tanner stated flatly. It wasn't a question. Bounty hunter, meaner than a gut-shot bear and twice as vengeful. "What did you do to earn this particular brand of hell, Crane?" Lila met his gaze, the gray in her eyes like chips of flint. She lowered the rifle slightly, her grip still firm. "I survived," she said, the word simple, heavy with unspoken history. "He doesn't like loose ends, especially ones that cost him money." She didn't elaborate on the burned homestead, the locket's origin, the source of the bounty. The scars, visible and invisible, were testament enough. Tanner grunted. rubbing a hand over his beard. He glanced at the scarred buckle at his waist, his thumb tracing the etched half-moon. A shadow crossed his face, a glimpse of a different guilt, a different failure. Loose ends, he echoed, the word tasting bitter. He looked from Lila, holding his rifle with a grim resolve that belied her frame, to the scared but observant boy. In your fight, Nate. Best you clear out. Nate shook his head, a surprising stubbornness setting his jaw. He saw me watching, down at the creek. Reckon I'm tangled in it now. He swallowed hard. Besides, he ain't alone. The words hung like ice in the warm cabin. Tanner's head snapped up. Alone? What did you see? Two others, Nate whispered, his eyes wide. Rode in just as I was leaving town. Met him by the old assay office. Hard-looking men. One had a scattergun. The fragile sense of momentary security shattered. Cade wasn't just taunting. He was marshaling forces. The cabin, a fragile refuge moments ago, now felt like a trap. Tanner cursed under his breath, a low, vicious sound. He moved to the shuttered window again, peering out into the deepening twilight. The wind had picked up, moaning through the pines like a dirge. Blizzard's coming, he muttered. Won't be able to track us easy in a wideout, but we won't see them coming neither. He turned back, his gaze sweeping over Lila and Nate. We can't stay here. He knows the place. They'll surround it, wait us out, or burn us in. The implication hung heavy. Like your home? Lila felt the phantom heat on her wrist. Where? Lila asked, her voice steady despite the cold dread coiling in her stomach. She adjusted her grip on the sharps. The weight felt less alien now, a necessary burden. Higher ground, Tanner said, grabbing a worn saddlebag and starting to shove supplies into it. Jerky, a flask, cartridges. There's an old trapper's shack up near Bear Claw Ridge. Harder to find, harder to approach. We get there, hunker down till the storm passes, or we make a stand. He stopped, looking directly at Lila. The cynicism was still there, etched deep, but beneath it was something else, a grudging acknowledgement, a flicker of shared defiance. You still think you're too frail for this, Crane? Before she could answer, a sound cut to the moaning wind, sharp, distant, yet unmistakable. The brittle crack of a rifle shot, echoing off the rocky hillside. It came from the direction of the frozen creek, the path leading back to Frostfall. A single, deliberate report. Not hunting, a signal, or a warning. The silence that followed was thicker, heavier than before. 3 pairs of eyes met in the flickering lantern light. The question wasn't if Cade was coming. It was how close were his men already, and could they slip into the teeth of the gathering storm before the shadows closed in for good? The wind shrieked against the cabin walls, sounding like laughter, cold, cruel, and far too near. The rifle shots' echo died, swallowed by the wind's rising moan. In the cabin, sudden, breathless silence. The crackle of the hearth felt obscenely loud. Tanner's hand tightened on the Colt at his hip, knuckles white. His gaze, sharp and stripped of cynicism, locked onto Lila's. The question hung unspoken. Signal? Warning? Or a bullet meant for one of them? The blizzard wasn't coming. It was here, its voice a guttural howl battering the log walls. Snow already beginning to lash against the bubble window glass like frantic, frozen fingers. No time. Tanner rasped, the words gritty. He shoved the last of the jerky into the saddlebag, his movement efficient despite the pronounced drag of his bad leg. He tossed a thick, grease-stained wool blanket to Nate. Wrap up, boy. That wind'll flay the hide off you. He snatched a second blanket, thrusting it towards Lila. His eyes flicked to the Sharp's rifle she still held, her grip surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her breath. You point that thing, Crane, you best mean it. Snow plays tricks. Shadows move. Don't shoot at ghosts, but don't hesitate if it ain't a ghost. Lila nodded, the cold dread in her stomach hardening into a knot of resolve. She slung the heavy rifle over her shoulder, the weight a grim anchor. She took the blanket, its coarse weave scratching her neck as she draped it over her head and shoulders. The tarnished locket beneath her coat felt like an ice chip against her skin, a cold reminder the fire Cade had brought before. He wouldn't burn them out here, she thought grimly. The snow would bury them first. Nate fumbled with the blanket, his young face pale beneath the fur cap, but his eyes held a determined glint. He patted the bone handle of his knife, a silent affirmation. Tanner blew out the guttering lantern, plunging the cabin into near darkness save for the dying embers in the hearth. The wind's howl intensified, a living thing pressing against the door. "Move quick, move quiet," he ordered, heaving the heavy bar aside. A blast of frigid air and swirling snow invaded, stealing their breath. "Stay close. Lose sight your loss of good." They plunged into the white fury. The world vanished beyond 10 feet. Snow drove horizontally, stinging exposed skin like shards of glass. The path Tanner had mentioned was instantly obliterated, replaced by a shifting, treacherous landscape of deepening drifts and hidden dips. The cold bit deep, a physical assault that seeped through wool and leather, numbing fingers and toes within minutes. Pines groaned under their burdens of snow, branches cracking like gunshots in a tumult. The frozen creek below was a ghostly murmur beneath the storm's roar. Lila moved behind Tanner, his broad back a shadowy bulwark against the wind. Nate pressed close at her heels, his smaller form buffeted. Tanner's limp was more pronounced now, each step a visible effort as he post-holed through drifts that reached his thighs. Lila watched the silhouette strain, the rhythmic hitch in his gait speaking of old agony. His hand brushed his belt buckle, the scarred half-moon momentarily catching a stray glint of diffused light before vanishing again in the whiteout. It wasn't a conscious gesture. It was instinct, a touchstone for a wound that went deeper than bone. The air hadn't been cold, but thick with Georgia heat and the coppery stench of fear. Smoke stung Tanner Holt's eyes as he crouched behind the splintered remnants of the fence. Shouting, rebel yells, the awful thump of bullets hitting flesh. Sergeant Calloway, his face gray with dust and pain, gripped Tanner's arm. "Holt, flanks crumbling. Need you. Hold that ridge. Give the boys time to pull back." Calloway's eyes, wide with desperation, held Tanner's. "Promise me. Hold it." Tanner nodded, the weight of the order crushing. He'd scrambled up, rifle hot in his hands, the half-moon buckle on his belt digging into his gut as he crawled. He saw them then, a dozen gray coats advancing through the orchard. Too many. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through him. He saw Calloway's face, trusting. Heard the screams of men caught in the retreat. The buckle pressed hard, a mocking reminder of his father's words. A Holt stands. But the fear won. He'd slid back down, away from the ridge, away from the advancing line. He ran, the buckle a brand of shame, just as a Confederate volley tore into the position he'd abandoned. Calloway's final, betrayed shout followed him. The limp came later, from a mini ball as he fled, a permanent reminder of the ridge he hadn't held, the promise broken. The buckle was all he had left of the man he'd failed. Lila saw Tanner stumble, not just from the snow, but from the memory that momentarily clouded his eyes. He caught himself, grunting, his jaw clenched. He didn't look back, but his voice, when he spoke, was rough. "Keep moving, Crane. Ain't got time for dawdling." They fought their way higher, the ridge a looming, unseen presence. Nate, surprisingly agile, darted ahead, using his smaller size to find firmer footing near rocks and tree trunks. He paused, crouching low, examining the snow near a cluster of wind-blasted pines. He gestured urgently. Lila and Tanner struggled towards him. "Horses," Nate shouted over the wind, pointing at deep, rapidly filling depressions in the snow. 3 of them, heading the same way, not long gone. He brushed snow from a patch of exposed ground, revealing the unmistakable, sharp-edged imprint of a silver spur rowel. The intricate scrollwork partially filled, but undeniably Cade's. Beside it, gouged crudely into frozen earth with a knife point, was a single word: soon. The taunt hung in the frigid air, more menacing than the storm. Cade wasn't just following. He was hurting them, mocking their flight. Lila's hand tightened on the rifle sling. Tanner spat into the snow, a gesture of pure contempt. "Bastard likes his games," he growled. "Means he's close. Too damn close. Move." The ascent grew steeper, the drifts deeper. Lila found herself taking the lead more often, her wiry frame sometimes finding paths Tanner's broader shoulders couldn't navigate. She used a rifle, but like a staff, probing the snow ahead for hidden drops. Once, she grabbed Nate's arm, hauling him back as the snow gave way beneath his foot, revealing a hidden crevice. He nodded, breathless gratitude in his eyes. Tanner watched her, a flicker of something that wasn't just grudging acceptance, but the dawning of actual reliance pass across his weathered face. "Ridge ain't far," Tanner yelled, peering into the blinding white. Shacks tucked in a cleft near the crown. Hard to spot, harder to reach. They pushed on, lungs burning, legs leaden. The wind seemed to redouble its fury, screaming like a banshee through the rocks. Just as despair threatened to freeze them solid, a darker shape materialized through the swirling snow. A low, squat structure building to the lee of a massive granite outcrop. The trapper's shack. Its roof sagged under a thick cap of snow, but the stone chimney stood firm. No smoke, no light, just a huddled promise of shelter against the relentless white. Relief, sharp and almost painful, washed over Lila. They stumbled the last few yards, collapsing against a rough-hewn log wall beside the heavy plank door. Nate slumped to the snowy ground, gasping. Tanner leaned heavily, his chest heaving, his face etched with exhaustion and pain. He fumbled for the iron latch. "We made it," Nate breathed, a shaky smile touching his lips. Tanner pushed the door open. It swung inward with a protesting groan. The dim interior was revealed. A single room, smaller than his cabin, smelling of dust, old pelts, and damp. Empty, but not untouched. Lila stepped in first, the sharps instinctively coming off her shoulder. Her eyes, adjusting to the gloom, scanned the shadows. A crude table, a rusted stove, a bunk pile with mildewed blankets. And then she saw it, propped against a cold stove, illuminated by the gray light filtering through a single grimy window, was a long, narrow bundle wrapped in oilcloth. It hadn't been there long. No dust coated it. Tanner saw it too. He froze in the doorway, his hand dropping from the latch. Nate scrambled to his feet, peering in. Lila approached cautiously, the rifle held ready. She nudged the bundle with her boot. It was heavy, solid, using the rifle muzzle. She carefully flipped back a corner of the stiff oilcloth. Beneath it, gleaming dully even in the poor light, lay a brand-new Winchester repeating rifle. Beside it, neatly stacked, were 2 boxes of .44-40 cartridges. And tucked under the rifle stock was a folded piece of paper. The silence inside the shack was profound, broken only by the muffled howl of the blizzard outside. The gift felt obscene, a spider's offering. Lila didn't need to unfold the paper to know who it was from. The message was clear. "I know where you are. I can reach you anytime." Cade wasn't just chasing them. He was playing with them, demonstrating his reach, his control. The warmth of potential shelter turned icy. Tanner's face hardened into a mask of grim fury. Nate's eyes darted nervously to the single window, half expecting to see a sharp-featured face pressed against the glass. Lila reached down, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the Winchester. Was it a taunt? A trap laid within the trap of the shack itself? Or something worse, a chilling invitation to a fight on his terms, with a weapon she hadn't earned? The wind screamed against the walls, sounding like Cade's cruel laughter. They had reached sanctuary, only to find it was already a cage. The silence inside the shack was a living thing, thick with a reek of damp pelts, dust, and cold dread. The Winchester rifle lay exposed on the oilcloth, its newwood gleaming unnaturally in the dim light filtering through the snow-caked window. The folded paper beside it felt like a coiled rattlesnake. Outside, the blizzard shrieked, a banshee chorus that battered the log walls, snow hissing against the timbers like thrown sand. The fragile warmth of their escape had vanished, replaced by the icy certainty of Cade's game. Lila stared at the rifle. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a dare, a challenge thrown down with cruel precision. Take it and play by his rules. Leave it and admit defeat. Her hand hovered over the cold steel barrel, the sharps heavy on her shoulder. The tarnished locket beneath her coat felt like a brand against her skin, the phantom scent of lavender and smoke a whisper in her mind. Trap, Tanner growled, his voice rough as he slammed the heavy plank door shut, dropping the thick wooden bar into place. He limped to the grimy window, peering out into the swirling white void. Set it here, knowing we'd run for the only shelter on this godforsaken ridge. Bastard's probably sitting out there right now, logging his damn head off. His hand brushed the scarred half-moon buckle, a gesture born of habit and deep-seated unease. The memory of his own failure, the ridge he hadn't held, felt suffocatingly close in confined space. Nate crouched by the cold stove, shivering despite the thick blanket. His sharp eyes scanned the small room, the sagging bunk, the crude table, the bundles of old, sour-smelling furs stacked in a corner. Could be rigged, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm's howl. He touched the bone handle of his knife, the familiar shape offering scant comfort. The rifle, or something else. Lila's fingers finally closed around the Winchester stock. It was lighter than the sharps, sleeker, deadly. She lifted it carefully, checking the action. It moved smoothly, oiled and ready. She ejected a cartridge from a magazine, a pristine .44-40. She sniffed it cautiously. No unusual odor. Seems clean, she murmured, her voice tight. But the gift, that's the poison. She unfolded the paper. The message was short, written in a sharp, angular hand that matched the man. Make it interesting. K. Interesting? Tanner spat, turning from the window, his face grim. He wants a show, wants a scared running, making mistakes, like cornered rabbits. He looked at Lila, holding the new rifle. The cynicism was still there, etched deep, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, a hard-won respect for quiet steel in her gaze. What's your play, Crane? We hunker down, wait for him to come knocking, or try vanishing into that white hell outside? He gestured toward the door, where the storm screamed its fury. Lila weighed the Winchester in her hands. Cade knew the shack. He'd laid his trap. Staying meant fighting on his chosen ground, likely surrounded. Fleeing into the blizzard was near suicide, but offered a slim chance of breaking his pattern, of using the storm as cover. Her gaze swept the small space, landing on Nate. The boy looked terrified but resolute, his knuckles white where he gripped his knife. He was part of this now, tangled in her nightmare. She couldn't lead him to slaughter in this damp tomb. We can't stay, she stated, the decision settling cold and clear within her. He expects it. He's got men time. We've got the storm for now. She looked at Tanner. You know this ridge. Is there another way down? Somewhere they wouldn't expect. Tanner rubbed his bad leg, thinking. East face. Steep. Treacherous. Leads down to a box canyon. Ain't no way out of canyon, except back the way you come. But there's caves. Places to hide, wait out the storm. Risky as hell, especially in this. He nodded toward the window. But yeah, Cade likely figured we'd try the known trails west or north. East, Lila confirmed. She slung the sharps over her shoulder again and hefted the Winchester. 2 rifles, one a bird and one a taunt. Both tools now. Nate, check the water cask. See if it's clean, full. Tanner, see what else might be useful here. Quickly. Nate scrambled toward a small, dust-covered cask near the bunk. He pulled out the cork stopper, sniffed cautiously, then dipped a finger in. He touched it to his tongue, then spat violently. Bitter, like like lie or something. He wiped his mouth frantically. Cade hadn't just left a gift. He'd sabotaged their water. Tanner cursed again, a raw sound. Figures. Mean son of a... He began rifling through the mildewed blankets on the bunk, finding nothing useful. He kicked at a pile of furs in frustration. Nothing but rotten stink. As Nate recorked the poison cask, his hand brushed the bone handle of his knife again. The smooth, cold ivory seemed to ground him. He looked at Lila, her silhouette tense against the gray light as she peered out a crack in the doorframe. Then at Tanner, his face etched with pain and anger. They were trapped, hunted, thirsty. His father's face swam before his eyes. Not the gaunt, sickly verge at the end, but the strong man who taught him the woods. The air had been crisp, autumn bright in the Montana high country, not choked with snow and fear. Nate's father, Elias, knelt by a clear mountain stream, his hand steady as he showed Nate how to notch the bone handle of the knife. His knife now, with a tiny rabbit track. See, son? Elias's voice was warm, strong. Every mark tells a story. This one says rabbit passed here, heading for the thicket. He pointed to a faint scuff on a nearby rock. And that, mule deer, favoring its left foreleg. He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. Reading the land, Nate, that's how you live. How you stay ahead of trouble. He placed the knife in Nate's small hands. This was my pause. It's seen hardship, but it endured. Like us. You remember, the land gives warnings. Listen to him. And when trouble comes, he gestured toward a dense patch of chokecherry bushes nearby. You don't always face it head-on. Sometimes you slip into the thicket. Wait, outlast. Weeks later, Elias was coughing blood, his strength leaching away with the fever. His final words, whispered as Nate clutched the knife, were about listening to the land, about finding the thicket. Then the stillness. Nate had buried him under a lone pine, the bone handle cold in his grip, the lessons etched deeper than the rabbit track. Nate stood up straighter, the memory a spark in the gloom. The thicket, he said suddenly, his voice firmer. Both Lila and Tanner turned to him. My pa, he said, when trouble comes, sometimes you gotta slip into the thicket. Wait it out. He pointed towards the east-facing wall of the shack. The canyon. It's full of rock slides, boulders big as houses, places to hide, like a thicket of stone. We get down there, we vanish. We listen. We wait. Lila looked at the boy, seeing not just fear, but the hard-earned wisdom of survival passed down. Tanner grunted, a sound that might have been approval. Kid's got a point. Rock slides on the east face. Labyrinth down there. Dangerous, but hiding holes aplenty. Hope, fragile as an icicle, glimmered. They had a direction, a gambit. Lila checked the loads in both rifles. We go east. Now, before they tighten the noose. She moved to the door, lifting the heavy bar. The wind instantly snatched at it, howling into the gap. Snow swirled in, stinging their faces. Stay close. Move quiet. Nate, you lead when we hit the rocks. Find us that thicket. They plunged back into the maelstrom. The cold was a physical blow after the shack's feeble shelter. Snow drove into them, blinding, suffocating. Tanner led, fighting his way around the back of the shack, heading towards a sheer drop of the east face. Nate followed, his smaller form leaning into the wind, eyes scanning the ground ahead with newfound focus. The bone knife awaited his hip. Lila brought up the rear. The Winchester held ready, her senses straining against the storm's roar for any sound that didn't belong. A jingle of spur, the crunch of a boot. Visibility was less than 10 feet. The world was reduced to swirling white, and the dark shapes of stunted pines clinging to the rocks. They reached the edge of the ridge, where the ground fell away sharply into a churning white abyss. Tanner pointed downwards, his shout torn away by the wind. Nate nodded, starting to pick his way along a treacherous, snow-covered goat track that switched back down the cliff face. Lila paused, casting one last look back toward where the shack lay hidden in the storm. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Not an animal, but a darker shape detaching itself from the swirling snow near the shack's corner. A man's silhouette, broad-shouldered, holding a long gun. One of Cade's men? Had they been seen leaving? Before she could warn the others, a sound cut through the wind's shriek. Not the crack of a rifle, but a voice. Cold, clear, and carrying an unnatural distance on the frozen air. It sliced through the storm like Cade's silver spur. Lila Crane. The voice was unmistakable. Cade Waller. He sounded close. Too close. Running only makes the price steeper. Come out, or shall I smoke you out like the little field mouse you are? I do so love the smell of burning things. Reminds me of home. Sweet lavender, wasn't it? The words, laced with venomous familiarity, struck Lila like a physical blow. The phantom scent of burning wood and lavender choked her. He wasn't just hunting her. He was savoring it, and he knew exactly where they were headed. The treacherous path down the cliff face suddenly felt less like an escape route and more like a funnel leading straight into Cade's sights. The wind screamed, but beneath it, Lila heard the faint, mocking jingle of a spur. Cade Waller's voice, laced with malice and the phantom scent of lavender smoke, hung in the frozen air like poison. Sweet lavender, wasn't it? The word struck Lila like a physical blow, freezing her for a heartbeat longer than the bitter wind. The dark shape near the shack solidified. One of Cade's men, a bulky silhouette raising a rifle. The east face wasn't an escape. It was a gauntlet. Down. Now! Tanner roared, shoving Nate ahead onto the treacherous, snow-slick goat trail. He fired his Colt blindly toward the shack, the shot swallowed by the blizzard's howl, but it bought seconds. The bulky silhouette ducked back. Lila scrambled after them. The Winchester clutched tight. The path was a nightmare, barely visible under fresh drifts winding down a sheer rock face. Ice cracked underfoot, the sound echoing sharply in the brief lulls between wind gusts. Below, the box canyon yawned, a churning white maw filled with the dark, jagged teeth of boulders and fallen slabs. Nate's thicket of stone. Their only chance. Snow lashed their faces, stinging, blinding. Tanner's limp was a pronounced drag, each step a gamble on the unstable ground. Nate moved with desperate agility, his sharp eyes scanning the cliff face below. There, he yelled, pointing toward the dark fissure halfway down, partially obscured by a massive, snow-dusted boulder. Cave. Get to the boulder first. They slid, scrambled, and fought their way down, the wind tearing at them. Shouts echoed from above, distorted by the storm. A rifle cracked. A bullet whined off rock near Lila's head, showering her with icy fragments. She didn't flinch. She turned, braced a Winchester against her shoulder in the lee of a smaller rock, and fired back towards a muzzle flash above. The recoil jarred her, but the shot felt true. A cry, abruptly cut off, confirmed it. Keep moving. Tanner gasped, pulling her onward. His face was gray with pain and effort, but his eyes held a fierce, unfamiliar light. Not flight, but fight. The buckle at his waist seemed less a weight, more an anchor to man he was forcing himself to be now. They reached the relative shelter of the colossal boulder, lungs burning. The cave mouth yawned darkly just beyond, a narrow slit in the rock. But before they could dive in, figures emerged from the swirling snow further along the canyon floor. 2 men, shotguns leveled, blocking the path to the cave. Cade's reinforcements. They'd been herded perfectly. Lila and Tanner ducked behind a boulder as buckshot peppered the stone where they'd stood moments before. Nate pressed flat beside them, eyes wide, but his hand was steady on the bone handle of his knife. Trapped, above them, more shapes were picking their way down the trail. Cade's mocking laughter seemed to ride the wind itself. End of the line, Mouse. Cade's voice drifted down, closer now. He appeared on a ledge 20 feet above them, lean and sharp-featured, like a winter-starved hawk, his silver spurs gleaming dully even in the stormlight. He held a rifle casually, but his eyes, cold and predatory, were fixed on Lila. Should have taken the Winchester and made your stand in the shack. More dignified. Now it's just messy. He gestured with the rifle barrel. Hand her over, Holt. The boy, too, for good measure. Maybe I let you limp away. Again. Tanner's jaw clenched. The old shame flared, the memory of the Georgia Ridge, the buckle digging into his gut. But this time, the ground didn't fall away beneath him. This time, he stood firm. You ain't Takeen her Waller, he rasped, his voice thick with defiance. And you ain't Takeen the boy. This ends here. Cade's smile was a knife slash. Sentiment? From you? How quaint. He raised his rifle. Pity? Lila's mind raced. The cave was blocked. The path up was cut off. The boulder was their only cover, and it wouldn't last. Cade's taunt echoed. Sweet lavender, wasn't it? The locket felt like a burning coal against her skin. He hadn't just burned her home. He'd tried to erase her, but he'd failed. She had survived, and she knew why he hunted her with such vicious focus. Smoke choked her, tears streaming from the acrid sting. Heat roared at her back. Cade Waller's cruel laugh echoed as she stumbled from the collapsing porch. The locket chain snapped in her grasp. Not just a locket. Pa's final gasp. Lila, run, take your ma's the ledger. She'd seen it then, on the floor near the kicked-over lamp. Her father's small, leather-bound account book. Not for crops. For the secret shipments Cade ran. Guns or renegades, stolen army payroll. Proof. She'd snatched it, the leather hot, just as a beam crashed down, searing her wrist. She'd run. The ledger stuffed inside her shirt, the locket clutched tight, the only portraits of her parents safe within. Cade's enraged bellow followed her into the night. Find her. She's got it. Burn the prairie if you have to. He hadn't just wanted her dead. He needed the evidence silenced. Her survival wasn't escape. It was a constant, dangerous accusation. The lavender scent clinging to the locket was all she had left of the life before the fire, before she became Cade Waller's most dangerous loose end. He doesn't want me dead just for surviving, Tanner, Lila said, her voice suddenly clear and cold as the mountain air cutting through the snow. She kept her eyes locked on Cade's ledge. He wants what I took from the fire. His ledger, proof of his treason, worth more than any bounty. She saw Cade's smirk vanish, replaced by a flicker of raw, startled fury. She'd named his secret. Shut your mouth, girl. Cade snarled, bringing his rifle up sharply. Now, Nate! Lila yelled. Nate didn't hesitate. He lunged not toward the armed men blocking the cave, but sideways, scrambling like a squirrel up a smaller, ice-glazed rock formation beside the main boulder. The men below, confused, tracked him with their shotguns. It was a distraction Tanner needed. He erupted from behind the boulder, his colt barking twice. One of the shotgun men crumpled. The other spun, firing wildly. Lila moved as one. She dropped to one knee, ignoring the shotgun blast tearing chunks from the boulder above her. She brought the Winchester to her shoulder, the unfamiliar rifle suddenly an extension of her will. She sighted not on Cade, but on the snow-laden overhang of rock above his ledge. She breathed out, the world narrowing to the sight picture, the memory of the fire fueling her resolve. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the Winchester was sharp, final. The bullet struck true, shattering a key ice pillar supporting the overhang. With a groan like a dying giant, a massive slab of snow and rock broke free, thundering down towards Cade's perch. Cade's eyes widened in genuine terror. He tried to leap back, but his silver spur caught on a jagged edge of rock. He stumbled, arms windmilling. The avalanche of snow and stone hit him full force, sweeping him off the ledge in a tumbling, silent cascade. He vanished into the white maelstrom below, swallowed by the storm and the weight of his own crimes. The mocking jingle of his spurs was silenced forever. The remaining shotgun man gaped, stunned by his employer's sudden violent end. Tanner didn't give him time to recover. A single shot from the Colt dropped him where he stood. Silence descended, deeper than before, broken only by the wind's fading moan and the settling snow. The blizzard was finally easing, the snow falling straight and soft now, like a benediction. Nate slid down from his perch, breathing hard, his eyes wide with disbelief. Tanner leaned heavily against the boulder, his chest heaving, looking at the spot where Cade had vanished. Then at Lila. There was no mockery left, only a profound, weary respect. Lila slowly lowered the Winchester. The weight felt different now. Not a burden, not a taunt. Earned. Her left hand rose, brushing the cold brass of the locket beneath her coat. The phantom scent of smoke was gone, replaced by the clean, icy bite of the mountain air. The scar on her wrist was just a scar, a mark of survival, not a brand of fear. She looked at Tanner, then at Nate, the young trapper who'd found his courage in the thicket. Dawn was a faint, gray promise in the east, bleeding to the thinning clouds. The storm had passed. Below, the box canyon lay hushed and still under its blanket of fresh snow, the jagged rock softened, the treacherous paths hidden. It wasn't a tomb. It was a landscape washed clean. Tanner pushed himself upright, wincing only slightly. He looked at the scarred half-moon buckle, then deliberately unbuckled it. He held it for a moment, the tarnished silver catching the weak light, before slipping it into his pocket. A burden laid down. "Reckon we best find that cave," he said, his voice rough but calm. "Wait out the light. Then figure out where west looks promising." Nate nodded, sheathing his bone-handled knife with a firm, confident click. He looked at Lila, a tentative smile touching his lips. "Pa always said the thicket gives you time. Time to breathe." Lila took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, clean and free. The wind no longer mourned to the pines. It whispered of distances, of horizons beyond the frozen ridges. She hefted the Winchester, not as a weapon against the past, but as a tool for the path ahead. She looked at the two men beside her, the cowboy who'd learned to stand, the boy who'd remembered how to hide, and nodded. "West," she agreed, her voice steady, carrying on the quiet air. The word wasn't just a direction. It was a beginning. Together, they turned towards the dark mouth of the cave, not as fugitives, but as survivors stepping out of the long night, into the fragile, hopeful light of a new day. The wilderness hadn't broken them. It had forged them, and the silence that followed was no longer oppressive, but filled with the quiet, resilient song of endurance.